Hey there, welcome to Night Lectures, your daily dose of fascinating stories. He was the king of Macedonia, a commander, and one of the greatest conquerors in history. Alexander the Great, a man whose victories changed the world and left an indelible mark on history. At the age of 20, he became king, and by the age of 30, his name was known across the entire world. In this video, you will learn, how did the young king manage to defeat mighty Persia and become Pharaoh of Egypt? Why did he decide to march into India even when his army refused to go further? What secret lay behind his leadership and his bond with his soldiers? And what truly happened on the day of his death? We will uncover these mysteries and tell the story of a man who changed the destinies of entire nations and forever entered history. Share your ideas for future videos in the comments and hit the subscribe button. New bedtime stories come out here daily. Alexander the Great was born in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, in the year 356 before Christ. His birth was not an ordinary event, as one might expect for the heir of a royal dynasty, for immediately after his arrival into the world, extraordinary and almost mythical signs occurred. According to ancient Greek chronicles, Alexander's mother, Olympias, during childbirth heard a loud peal of thunder and saw a bright star flare across the sky. To her, it was a sign that her son would become the greatest of rulers. It is no coincidence that almost every legend about his life began with such images that intertwined reality and myth, for Alexander was not merely a man. He was a symbol of greatness destined to herald a new era in history. His mother, Olympias, was a woman of strong will and determination. She was the daughter of the ruler of Epirus, and was herself an independent and powerful personality. Being highly influential, Olympias often found herself at the center of political intrigues and conflicts, which undoubtedly shaped her approach to raising her son. Her determination to raise Alexander as a great leader was evident in her methods, combining severity, even cruelty at times, with the noble purpose of ensuring him a worthy future. Olympias was obsessed with the thought that her son was not merely a future monarch, but someone destined to transform the entire world, much like the mythical Heracles, whose feats she used as an ideal to inspire Alexander. As for Philip II, Alexander's father, his role in his son's life was no less significant. Philip was a general, a strategist, and the creator of a mighty army that united Macedonia and extended its influence over neighboring lands. He was the man who greatly strengthened the Macedonian state, turning it into one of the most powerful forces in ancient Greece. Yet despite his military brilliance and political success, Philip was a man whose thirst for power and ambition often outweighed family bonds. His influence on Alexander was profound. The young man saw in his father a towering figure whose success was not inherited but earned through labor, warfare, and sacrifice. Philip was not only a warrior but the architect of Macedonian strength, and this vision was passed to Alexander, who increasingly began to sense his own destiny. Despite his father's political and military concerns, Philip did not neglect his son's upbringing. A crucial moment in Alexander's youth was his education under one of the greatest philosophers of the time, Aristotle. This thinker, whose writings spanned every field from metaphysics to astronomy, became the mentor of the future conqueror. Aristotle's teachings on philosophy, politics, science, and culture deeply shaped Alexander's worldview. Especially important were the lessons about the role of man in society and his relationship with the surrounding world. Aristotle taught him that wisdom and power are inseparable, that intellect can be as mighty a weapon as the sword. This belief became the foundation for Alexander's character, not only as a great general, but as a man capable of reshaping the course of history through his mind and strategy. However, Alexander was not just a student who absorbed knowledge. His upbringing also included early military exploits, administrative duties, and responsibilities that required the demonstration of leadership. At the age of 16, when his father departed on campaign, Alexander remained in Macedonia as regent. He showed not only resolve but strategic insight by suppressing a rebellion in Thrace. This victory became the first proof of his ability to command troops and make independent decisions. But this was only the beginning, for the true test of his strength and wisdom would come later when Philip entrusted him with major military operations. With each passing year, Alexander's ambitions and desire for leadership grew stronger. He was not a mere heir waiting for his turn. He was confident that his destiny was to be the greatest of rulers. Even as a boy, he began to dream of expanding his realm, perhaps without yet realizing how vast that journey would become. His childhood was filled not merely with study and play, but with an awareness of responsibility for the future. In every action, one could see his striving for excellence, and his wish to build a new order founded on justice and reason. His role in Macedonia's life was not only the result of what Philip had given him, but also the echo of his own determination and ambition. With his early successes and victories, Alexander was emerging as a man who would not simply follow his parents' path but surpass it, stepping beyond their achievements to create something entirely new. The making of the future conqueror began long before he ever drew a sword. His childhood laid the foundation for what would later make him not merely the son of a king, but a future ruler of the world. As Alexander grew older and gained experience in the art of war, his father, Philip II, began entrusting him with more serious military responsibilities. Though he had not yet reached full manhood, Alexander had already been tested in battle, and those tests confirmed his strategic mind and natural gift for warfare. His first truly decisive trial came with the Battle of Chaeronea in the year 338 before Christ. This clash, where Alexander first distinguished himself as a commander, played a crucial role in shaping his reputation and future military career. The Battle of Chaeronea was the defining confrontation between the Macedonian army led by Philip and the coalition of Greek city-states, chiefly Athens and Thebes. It was more than a simple military engagement. It was an event that determined the fate of Greece. On the battlefield stood an army united by the desire to preserve its independence from Macedonian dominance. It was a time when Greece still did not realize that its destiny would soon be decided not only in battle but also through political unity. At the age of 18, Alexander fought on the right flank of the Macedonian army. He commanded the cavalry and, at a decisive moment, displayed remarkable composure and tactical brilliance. As the battle intensified and the Macedonian forces faced a difficult situation, Alexander made a daring move. He led an unexpected charge against the Theban heavy infantry and broke through their ranks. This assault turned the tide of battle, securing victory for Macedonia. With this baptism of fire, Alexander demonstrated his outstanding abilities not only as a soldier but also as a leader. He won not only the battle itself but also the admiration of all who witnessed it, allies and enemies alike. Many sources claim that after the battle, Philip, filled with pride, told his son, "My victory would be nothing without your courage, my son." That moment marked the beginning of Alexander's legendary military career and showed that he was destined to become a great general even before he had his own throne. After Chaeronea, Alexander returned to Pella and continued his studies, but now with the confidence that he was not merely the king's son, but the true heir to power, a commander destined to shape the fate of nations. His education now had a new purpose, to prepare him for the grand conquest that lay ahead. Watching his father turn Macedonia into a formidable military power, Alexander increasingly understood that his duty was not only to preserve that power, but to extend it to limits unimaginable to his contemporaries. Soon after the victory at Chaeronea, Philip launched new campaigns that solidified his control and secured dominance over Greece. Yet despite his father's success, Alexander knew that his own time had not yet come, that his destiny was to lead armies and reshape the world. His vision extended beyond mere conquest. He dreamed of creating a new, unified civilization grounded in Greek culture and Macedonian strength. His idea of kingship was not merely ambitious but prophetic, for realizing it would require extraordinary determination and the ability to alter the course of history. Meanwhile, Macedonia remained a land of unrest. Many neighboring rulers were displeased with its growing power, and uprisings flared across the borders. But despite political instability, Alexander continued his preparation, waiting for his chance to prove himself again in battle, the first steps toward his great empire. The death of Philip II, King of Macedonia, was a tragedy that shook not only Alexander but the entire world his father had sought to rule. Philip was assassinated in the year 336 before Christ at Aegae, during the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra, who was marrying Alexander II, King of Epirus. During the celebration, as Philip walked toward the royal seats, he was struck by a knife. The murderer was one of his own bodyguards, Pausanias, who may have acted from personal vengeance or as part of a conspiracy. The circumstances of the murder remain mysterious. Who ordered the killing and for what reason is still debated. Some claim that it was the result of palace intrigues, others that it was linked to Philip's political rivals dissatisfied with his reign and foreign policies. The king's death became a turning point for Macedonia and its future. At only 20 years old, Alexander suddenly faced immense responsibility. The loss of his father was not only a personal blow, but a political crisis that put the stability of his rule at risk. All the forces that Philip had held in balance, both inside and outside the kingdom, now threatened to unravel. The young king had to prove his ability to govern and preserve the influence his father had built through such effort. For Alexander, His father's death meant that he had to act swiftly to secure his position. The moment he ascended the throne, several Greek regions and cities rose in rebellion, hoping that Philip's death would weaken Macedonia. Alexander had no time to hesitate. He acted immediately. His first challenge was to establish firm control within Macedonia itself. Despite his youth, Alexander quickly suppressed internal revolts with firmness and courage. He crushed uprisings in Thrace and secured the borders. At the same time, he strengthened alliances with key members of the Macedonian elite, winning the loyalty of the most influential generals and officers. Yet military power alone was not enough. Alexander understood that his rule would remain fragile unless he gained legitimacy in the eyes of both the nobility and the people. He therefore sought support from experienced figures such as Parmenion, a seasoned general who would later play a key role in his Asian campaigns. Alexander's combination of strength and diplomacy allowed him not only to pacify unrest, but to consolidate unity within the kingdom. Even at this early stage, Alexander's gaze was set far beyond Macedonia. He was already thinking of how to expand his influence abroad and how to respond to the looming Persian threat. He knew that his real trial lay ahead, and that his future would depend on the decisions he made now. After Alexander had secured his power in Macedonia and suppressed the rebellions, he could focus on more ambitious plans. The conquest of Greece and the consolidation of authority in the Balkans were only the first part of his strategy, which he intended to carry forward into Asia. Despite its political instability, Greece remained a vital pillar of his imperial ambitions. Not only the political, but also the cultural significance of Greece as the center of classical civilization mattered for Alexander's future. Immediately upon establishing his rule in Macedonia, Alexander understood that he needed to stabilize his position and put the country in order before embarking on broader military campaigns. War with the Greek cities that still maintained their independence was inevitable. Alexander knew that without the complete subjugation of Greece, he could not claim the role of unifier of all Hellenic polis, and his ambitions would not stop there. But before marching on new conquests, he had to remove resistance within Greece itself. One of the most serious challenges Alexander faced was in Athens. There, many political and military forces could have opposed his plans. Athens, like Thebes, was famous for its independence and readiness to defend it at the cost of life. In the year 335 before Christ, while Alexander was in Macedonia, the Athenians began to stir rebellion. The young king swiftly displayed his resolve. He refused to tolerate weakness and moved his army toward Athens to quell the uprising. The Athenian forces were defeated, yet instead of punishing them harshly, Alexander showed diplomatic restraint and took the city under his control. Even with this victory, Greece remained fragmented, and the threat of further revolts did not vanish. Alexander understood that his strategy must be political as well as military. His next move was even more decisive and shrewd. He created the Corinthian League, which became the foundation for the long-term consolidation of Macedonian power in Greece. The League, concluded between the Macedonian kingdom and the Greek polis, allowed Alexander to unite most of Greece under his control with minimal bloodshed. It was a purely strategic step that secured peace in the region and strengthened his influence. The creation of the Corinthian League also meant that Alexander became the formal leader of the Greek cities, serving as their hegemon. Thus, Greece was unified under his authority, and those polis that had not yet submitted to Macedonian power now joined the coalition, forming a league under Alexander's banner. It is important to note that he demonstrated his talent not only as a general, but as a diplomat. He used charisma, persuasion, and strength to forge a durable political alliance that solidified his position as the leader of all Greece. Yet despite his successes in the Balkans, Alexander did not pause. The consolidation of power in Greece was merely the first phase of his ambitious design. He knew that to aspire to world dominion, he had to turn his gaze eastward. He regarded Asia, with its wealth and with mighty Persia, as his principal objective. But before preparing for that campaign, he had to reinforce his internal position so that nothing would distract him from future conquests. Alexander began shaping a strategy for the Asian expedition by assembling the finest army that had ever fought under his command. Unlike earlier forces, this army possessed a balanced structure that combined infantry and cavalry while adding new tactical elements. The military reforms begun by his father, Philip II, formed the basis of Alexander's later successes, and in these changes lay the foundation of the Macedonian superiority in war. Above all, what mattered to Alexander was that he was now not only the ruler of Macedonia, but the leading figure for all Greece, capable of the greatest conquests. His actions within Greece, and his decisiveness, allowed him to consolidate his position as he prepared for the greatest wars the ancient world would ever witness. The young king knew that in the east, a formidable Persian empire awaited him, and it was on that front that he planned his principal battles. Outwardly calm, Alexander was filled with determination to fight the Persians and prove his greatness. His first task was to complete his preparations and ferry his army across the Hellespont into Asia, where his great struggle for the new world he sought to build would begin. In the year 334 before Christ, one of the most ambitious and decisive phases in Alexander's life began: his campaign into Asia. This moment marked a turning point. It was the hour when all his dreams, plans, and ambitions took tangible form. Alexander stood ready to begin his path toward a power unmatched in history, and his eyes were already fixed on the greatest empire of that time: Persia. The reasons for the expedition were clear and layered. On the one hand, it was revenge for the defeats the Greeks had suffered at Persian hands in battles such as Marathon, and the desire to restore his people's honor. On the other hand, it was Alexander's personal ambition, the drive to be a great commander standing upon the pedestal of world history. He saw in this campaign not only the chance to cement his authority, but to eliminate the Persian threat to the Greek world as a whole. And perhaps, deep within, he understood that this was his opportunity to create not merely an empire, but a new order, founded on the ideals and values he deemed essential for the future. The great historian Arrian, describing the beginning of Alexander's campaign, notes that the first step was the most important. When the army crossed the Hellespont, the moment symbolized a boundary between two worlds, the world of Europe and the world of Asia. For Alexander and his soldiers, crossing that strait meant not only a physical passage from one continent to another, but the beginning of a new epoch in history. For him, it was more significant than a mere geographic transition, because with that step, he entered a new world of great battles, unprecedented trials, and vast possibilities. Alexander was ready to confront a Persian army that outnumbered his own. Nevertheless, the Macedonian force was experienced, well-trained, and disciplined, and its commander, even when facing superior numbers, always found ways to win. From the very outset, Alexander relied not only on strength, but on ingenuity, employing strategies that allowed him to prevail despite the apparent advantages of his foes. The first battle that became a key moment in the campaign was the Battle of Issus. Like all great clashes, it left a deep imprint on history. Issus was not merely a place where two armies fought. It was a stage upon which tactics, genius, and courage determined the outcome. Darius III, the Persian king, set against Alexander an army whose numbers nearly doubled those of the Macedonians. Yet Alexander, with unbending resolve and military wisdom, knew that victory could be won not only by numbers but by command, by exploiting mobility and tactical maneuvers. At Issus, Darius's army was stretched along a narrow coastline, placing it at a disadvantage. Alexander, using the strength of his cavalry, struck at the flanks, increasing pressure on the Persian lines and slicing through their defenses. Darius III, finding himself in the thick of battle, realized that his army was collapsing. He withdrew, abandoning the field and his soldiers. It was a decisive Persian defeat that confirmed Alexander as a new great commander. For Alexander, however, Issus did not mark the end of struggle. It was only the first in a series of decisive engagements that would lead to the final conquest of Persia. Unlike many other generals, Alexander was not inclined to cruelty after victory. He showed wisdom and restraint, incorporating Persian prisoners into his ranks, whereas many commanders would have killed or enslaved their foes. This was part of his strategy of uniting the peoples he conquered and building an empire founded upon respect and mutual understanding. After Issus, Alexander did not slow his advance. Seizing key cities, he continued eastward, strengthening his army ever more confidently. He gathered resources and new forces on the road to Persia, knowing that the struggle with Darius III was far from over. These victories enhanced his reputation and cemented his standing as the greatest of commanders, ready to challenge Persia itself. After the victory at Issus and his successful sweep along the coast, Alexander turned his army toward Egypt. This was a strategic masterstroke, for Egypt, as part of the Persian Empire, was one of the most significant and culturally advanced lands of the age. Though mighty in antiquity, Egypt was then weakened and divided, and Persia could no longer hold it firmly. Alexander met no serious resistance upon entering Egypt. The local population, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him gladly. As a liberator, he was recognized by the Egyptians, who began to honor him as their new ruler, not expecting cruelty or persecution. Unlike in other conquered regions where he encountered fierce resistance, Egypt opened its doors to him and offered broad opportunities. Seeing in him a sovereign, The local priesthood invited Alexander to become pharaoh. This title mattered not only as a sign of political legitimacy, but as a means to fortify his status in Egypt and among other nations. By accepting the kingship of Pharaoh, Alexander assumed not only political authority, but religious dignity as well, becoming the link between gods and men. For the Egyptians, this meant that their new ruler was not merely a worldly king, but a sacred figure tied to the divine, which accorded him even greater reverence. Alexander did not miss the chance to consolidate his position. He soon founded a new city, Alexandria, intended to be not only a strategic hub, but a symbol of the union between East and West. The city was planned as a center of learning, commerce, and culture, where Greeks and Egyptians could live side by side and where diverse traditions might mingle. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, built in the future, would become one of the 7 wonders of the world, and the city itself one of the greatest on earth, leaving its mark on history for many centuries. Alexander also took part in ceremonies that emphasized his new station in Egypt. He joined in rituals, honored Egyptian gods, and underscored his connection to them. This integration into Egyptian religion and culture strengthened his authority as ruler and eased the acceptance of his power by the Egyptians, who, for all their devotion to tradition, sought in their sovereign a reverence for the symbols that mattered to their people. Another crucial step was how Alexander used these events to shape his image. He presented himself not only as a conqueror, but as a great ruler capable of uniting and honoring diverse cultures. His respect for Egyptian religion and custom not only strengthened his rule in Egypt, but also secured long-term support across other conquered lands. Alexander's strategy reached deeper than battlefield triumphs. He understood that to build a unified empire, one must not only win in war, but also harmoniously integrate many cultures into one whole. Recognizing Egypt's importance for his future, Alexander also began to realize the project of establishing a new capital that would become a cultural and scholarly beacon. Alexandria was conceived as a city where Greek culture would intertwine with Egyptian, and where the finest minds of East and West would meet. This city was to be the emblem of a new world in which ideas and trade could move freely, and cultural diversity would be not merely a possibility, but the very foundation of prosperity. Once Alexander had secured his authority in Egypt and set the construction of Alexandria in motion, he pressed onward with determination. The Egyptian triumph became a major milestone on his path to further conquest. Egypt provided not only a rich store of resources and a strategic springboard for future campaigns, but also a vital symbol for Alexander's empire, a sign of his ability to govern different cultures and unite them beneath a single sovereignty. After the victory at Issus and further advances through the eastern territories, Alexander reached the decisive moment of his campaign, the confrontation with the last barrier on his road to world dominion. The Persian Empire, led by Darius III, remained the most powerful enemy he had yet to face. The war with Persia, begun several years earlier, had reached its climax. Although Darius had already suffered one defeat at Issus, he still possessed immense resources and numerical superiority, which made the Battle of Gaugamela a matter of life and death for both Persia and Macedonia. Seeing the threat posed by Alexander, Darius assembled the greatest army of his reign. By various estimates, its numbers ranged from 100 to 200,000 soldiers, including infantry, cavalry, and war elephants. The army's composition was extraordinarily diverse and included elite Persian units, mercenaries, and allies from many regions under Persian control. The Persians also deployed their war elephants, which Alexander regarded as a serious danger and for which he prepared with special care. Yet despite this numerical advantage, Darius made a strategic error that led to his defeat. He chose an open plain on the field of Gaugamela, which allowed Alexander to exploit maneuver and the mobility of his forces, offsetting the enemy's superior numbers. An experienced commander, Alexander knew that his army must strike at the flanks, where the Persians would be most vulnerable. At the outset of the battle, when the Persian army formed its line, Darius tried to use his numbers to encircle the Macedonians from both sides. Alexander, however, shifted his troops with exceptional flexibility. He used his cavalry to launch sudden attacks on the Persian flanks. This created in the enemy ranks the sense that the battle had slipped from their control, and their formations began to lose cohesion. The pivotal moment came with the assault on the Persian center. Leading his heavy cavalry in person, Alexander broke through the ranks at the heart of the Persian line and drove straight toward Darius. Seeing his army's fighting capacity collapsing, the Persian king, fearing for his life, chose to flee the field. Though it saved him, this decision proved fatal for the whole Persian army, which immediately fell into panic and retreated. After the victory at Gaugamela, Alexander's forces advanced with little resistance, while the Persian army disintegrated, and Persia lost its hold over the region. Yet the triumph was not merely the result of enemy losses, it was also a victory of Alexander's idea. He proved that military cunning, battlefield mobility, and strategic flexibility could defeat even overwhelmingly superior forces. The next step after the battle was the capture of Persian cities, including Susa and Persepolis, the latter becoming the emblem of victory and of Persia's downfall. Susa, lying along the empire's eastern approaches, was a crucial cultural and administrative center. Seizing the city deprived Persia of yet another strategic resource and strengthened Alexander's position in the region. But the most striking act of retribution came with the destruction of Persepolis, the ancient capital of the Persian Empire. Alexander ordered it put to the torch, its splendid palaces and temples consumed by flames, a symbol of the fall of a once invincible empire. It was not mere destruction, it was an act of vengeance for the devastation of Greek polis, and especially for the burning of Athens during the Persian Wars. The ruination of Persepolis carried profound symbolism. It marked the end of an age, the end of Persian rule, and the beginning of a new era in which Alexander emerged not only as a general, but as the founder of a new civilization. Persepolis, the cultural and political heart of Persia, was destroyed, yet its legacy remained, and Alexander now took responsibility for the future of those lands. With Gaugamela won and Persepolis seized, Alexander felt his authority had become unassailable. The entire East lay open before him, and his army, victorious over the mightiest adversary of their time, could now press onward. Alexander knew he stood on the threshold of the greatest of conquests, and could build an empire without equal in history. After completing his campaign to conquer Persia and establishing his rule over vast territories, Alexander set his gaze farther east. The Indian lands, immense in scale and distinct in culture from anything he had yet encountered, became his next objective. He knew that India, with its ancient civilization and powerful kingdoms such as that of Porus, was not merely another region of the world, but a crucial milestone on the road to universal dominion. The march into India was more than a military expedition. It was the emblem of his ambition, to enter history as the man who subdued every corner of the known world. Yet, as events would show, India proved both a great trial and a tragic turning point in his path. In the year 326 before Christ, Alexander's army reached the river Hydaspes. There, at that vital water barrier, he confronted the powerful Indian king Porus, famed for his forces and defensive skill. Unlike earlier battles in which Alexander's foes were demoralized and unable to offer a worthy stand, at the Hydaspes, he faced a true test. Though formidable, Porus was not prepared for the maneuvers and strategy Alexander would use. Porus's army held the high bank of the river, a tactical advantage, yet Alexander, despite the difficulty, ferried his army across through guile and creativity. As ever, his planning showed genius. While Porus expected a frontal assault, Alexander executed a wide flanking movement and struck from the sides. This allowed the Macedonians to deal a mortal blow to the enemy's line. Though Porus fought bravely, he was forced to yield. The Battle of the Hydaspes became a defining episode of Alexander's campaigns. He not only defeated a strong adversary, but pushed his influence far to the east. Yet the victory presaged grave problems within his ranks. Unlike the struggles in Persia or Greece, the Indian campaign became the first severe test of the army's endurance. After hard battles and long marches, his soldiers, exhausted, began to lose heart. This marked the start of serious difficulties. When the army reached the Hydaspes, it had been ready to fight and to proceed. After the victory, however, many soldiers gave voice to discontent and fatigue. Support for further advances began to wane. Many of the men, who had been campaigning for more than 8 years, longed to return home. The clash with Porus did not kindle the same exultation as earlier triumphs, and the troops began to demand a march back to Macedonia. Alexander's task was not only conquest, but the maintenance of morale. He understood that it would be difficult to continue deeper into India with the army in such a mood. His attempts to persuade them to go on did not succeed. Worn by years of campaigning, the soldiers had grown weary of distant roads and refused to advance into unknown lands. A hard but unavoidable decision was taken: to turn back. The army's refusal to push farther east was a decisive moment in Alexander's life. He was disappointed, for he had always pursued conquest and expansion. Yet even here he showed a ruler's rare flexibility. He understood that his men were no longer ready for further wars, and he therefore ordered a return to Babylon. It was one of the most tragic moments of his career. for he knew his dreams of subduing India would remain unfulfilled. After the decision to halt the advance, Alexander set course for Babylon to stabilize his rule over the territories already won and to organize future campaigns. Though a painful choice for a commander, it showed wisdom, the ability to know when to stop. The setback in India was certainly a failure, but it did not end his aspirations. He continued shaping his empire, and all he endured, including this conflict with his army, tempered his character as a great conqueror and sovereign. After the Indian campaign and the long road back, Alexander found himself in Babylon, not only the heart of his empire, but the center of the transformations that would determine the fate of his conquests. Babylon became the place where he could organize policy and where he had to confront new internal problems. In that ancient and mighty city, he planned the continuation of his rule, yet his path was blocked not only by political challenges, but also by personal conflicts that became inseparable from his life. The first months after Alexander's return were devoted to consolidating his authority. Babylon, the greatest hub of the empire's eastern realm, became the site where he resolved to build a new and still mightier capital that would combine the finest traditions of East and West. His vision of what the empire should be guided the construction of new palaces, temples, and administrative centers. He sought to unite different cultures and peoples, embedding in his dominion elements of both Greek and Eastern traditions. But the integration of East and West proved far more complex than it might first appear. Creating a single empire required much more than administrative reform and the founding of new cities. Alexander met resistance both from local rulers and within his own ranks. Many Macedonians rejected the Oriental customs and rites that Alexander tried to introduce, such as proskynesis, the veneration of the king as a quasi-divine being, which became part of his image. This sparked conflicts among his generals and intimates, including Parmenion and Hephaestion, who began to doubt the path their leader had chosen. Relations with Parmenion, one of the most experienced and respected commanders, grew increasingly tense. A champion of traditional military and political order, Parmenion did not share Alexander's new conception of kingship bound to Eastern religious practice and the title of the godlike ruler. He believed that by moving toward the East, Alexander was straying from his Greek roots and losing touch with his Macedonian heritage. This view became the source of serious disagreements between them. At the same time, troubles arose within the army. Generals who had fought countless battles with Alexander began to feel less essential. Ignoring their counsel more frequently, he relied increasingly on new advisors and favorites, which fostered resentment. He continued integrating Eastern elements into his empire, but this often led to friction with his command, which felt ever more estranged from the new realities. Special attention must be paid to his relationship with Hephaestion, Alexander's dearest friend. Their bond was personal and political alike. Hephaestion was among the few who supported Alexander in his drive to unite cultures and to build a new authority rooted in a synthesis of Eastern and Western traditions. Yet even between them, disagreements arose over the weight Alexander gave to Eastern practices. While Hephaestion supported the project, he also understood that such changes could provoke conflict with the army and with Macedonian society itself. Conflicts with generals and intimates, private doubts, and challenges within the troops became part of Alexander's daily life. He began to realize that to retain power, he needed not only victory in battle, but also a balance between personal ambition and the demands of governing a multicultural empire. His ideal of a universal empire, embracing many peoples and cultures, collided with the reality that those around him did not always accept this path. This was a time of deep reflection for Alexander. He increasingly pondered his future and the shape of his legacy. With every victory, his power grew. With every new decision aimed at merging East and West, resistance mounted. In the end, his ambition created one of history's greatest empires. But in the process, he faced personal and political crises that demanded not only military strength, but wisdom in rule. Everything Alexander did in life seemed directed to one end, the creation of the greatest empire, uniting East and West. His conquests, policies, reforms, and ambitions reshaped the world. Yet in the year 323 before Christ, at the age of 32, Alexander's life was cut short. His death at Babylon shook not only his intimates but the whole of ancient history. As in life, so in death, he remained surrounded by myths and enigmas. In his final months, Alexander felt his strength ebb, his health worsened, and though outwardly he remained the leader, his body suffered from an illness that became steadily more evident. Chroniclers report that he was tormented by a high fever that grew increasingly intense. Some sources say he complained of unusual pains, which could have been symptoms of an infectious disease, though his condition may also have been tied to overexertion, constant stress, and exhaustion. Meanwhile, rumors multiplied among those around him. The physicians could not reach a firm diagnosis, and many believed the illness was caused by external factors. Greeks and Macedonians watching his decline spread whispers that Alexander had been poisoned. Theories of treachery gained currency, and suspicion fell upon his closest generals, such as Antipater or Perdiccas. Uncertainty in the diagnosis and the events of the time gave rise to the notion of a political conspiracy. Later study, however, has led many historians to conclude that Alexander's death was most likely the result of disease. A host of factors, from psychological strain to the unfavorable conditions at Babylon, could have contributed to severe illness. The Babylonian climate, with heat and humidity, along with poor diet and physical exertion, may have triggered infections such as malaria or typhoid fever. The agonizing symptoms he suffered are consistent with malaria, which was common in the region. Whatever the cause, Alexander's death was a catastrophe not only for his empire, but for the ancient world as a whole. It became clear that the realm he had built could not survive without his personal leadership. His influence over his subjects and over Eastern politics was so great that his death immediately engendered a multitude of myths, the most famous being that he left no clear instruction regarding succession. Legend has it that his last answer to the question of who should inherit the empire was simple: to the strongest. The phrase became the symbol of the ensuing struggle for power, which ultimately led to the empire's dissolution. The fight over his legacy began at once, and several factors hastened the breakup. In the absence of a clearly designated heir, his generals, the so-called Diadochi, contended to partition the realm. These commanders and relatives intervened in politics to decide who would take each share. It became obvious that without Alexander, whose personal charisma and leadership had held the realm together, the empire could not remain whole. Myths and theories regarding his death proliferated. Rumors of poison, speculations about illness, and political insinuations all sowed confusion among friends and foes alike, and all were harnessed for political ends. The very fact that his death so swiftly spawned such tales speaks to the magnitude and significance of his persona. Over time, many stories about his last days appeared. Some claim he tried to hold power to the end. Others say he was resigned to death. Assertions that he was in fact poisoned remained popular in historical literature, and the tragedy of his end only magnified his legend. Thus, Alexander's death was not only a tragedy, but the beginning of a new era, filled with myths and mysteries that still attract historians and researchers. His passing left not only a vacuum of power, but a vast empire divided among his closest companions, a division that, in the end, led to the collapse of the greatest of conquests. When Alexander the Great died at the age of 32, his conquests, spanning enormous territories from Greece to India, became monuments to grandeur and ambition. Yet despite its size, his empire did not remain united for long after his death. Instead, it was carved up in a struggle for power. Even so, Alexander's legacy continued to shape the world for many years. He changed not only the political map, but also exerted a deep influence on culture and science fostered under the aegis of his conquests. His drive to unite East and West showed itself not only in policy, but in culture. The founding of many cities, such as Alexandria in Egypt, formed part of his strategy to spread Hellenistic civilization. These cities became centers of learning, philosophy, art, and trade, where cultures intersected. They became crucial nodes in the development of the ancient world. A powerful element of Alexander's policy was Hellenization, the spread of Greek culture across conquered lands. Raised in the spirit of Greek philosophy, art, and science, he sought not merely to conquer, but to integrate local cultures within Hellenistic frameworks. He personally furthered Greek customs, including city building and the use of Greek in administration. At the same time, he respected and adapted local traditions, which encouraged better relations with the peoples he subdued. The most important outcome of these efforts was the creation of a cultural and intellectual network that united Eastern and Western values. In Alexandria, in particular, there arose one of antiquity's greatest libraries, and the city itself became a center of Hellenistic science and philosophy. There flourished scholars such as Eratosthenes, Archimedes, Ptolemy, and many others whose works profoundly influenced the subsequent development of scientific thought. Yet even though Alexander forged an empire that served as a cultural bridge between East and West, his ambitions did not yield a lasting political union. His death left a void quickly filled by the power struggles of his generals, the Diadochi. Commanders such as Seleucus, Ptolemy, and Antigonus began to divide Alexander's lands among themselves, each aiming to seize as much as possible. Strikingly, despite the political breakup, Alexander's cultural influence endured. The Hellenistic civilization he propagated did not vanish with the empire's partition. It continued to thrive in regions ruled by his successors, such as Ptolemy in Egypt and Seleucus in Syria and Mesopotamia. Though politically separate, these kingdoms maintained and developed the ideals seeded by Alexander. The Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic dynasty became the principal heirs of Alexander's political and cultural legacy. The Seleucids held much of Persia and Central Asia, continuing to disseminate Hellenistic ideas there. The Ptolemies founded their realm in Egypt, with Alexandria as a paramount cultural and scientific center. These dynasties played key roles in the further growth of Hellenistic civilization, advancing its culture, art, and science. Thus, even though the empire dissolved, Alexander's legacy was not confined to conquest. His culture, philosophy, and ideas lived on in the lands he had subdued and exerted immense influence on the evolution of the ancient world. Thanks to Alexander, Greek culture and philosophy spread far beyond Greece, and he became the emblem of how seemingly incompatible worlds could be brought together. The death of Alexander the Great, like his life, became the emblem of an epic that forever altered history's course. Though his empire fragmented soon after his passing, its cultural and political influence endured through the centuries, leaving an indelible mark on world civilization. Alexander was not only a conqueror, but a creator of a new world where different cultures, traditions, and ideals met and intertwined. His conquests advanced Hellenistic culture, which shaped art, science, philosophy, and the political orders of the lands encompassed by his realm. His dream of a single empire uniting East and West did not fully come to pass, yet it inspired later generations of rulers and thinkers. The Hellenization he began laid the groundwork for the flourishing of Greek culture, which in turn influenced Rome, and then the entire Western world. Roman emperors, adopting many elements of Hellenistic civilization, created a powerful empire that, in its turn, transmitted aspects of that tradition across Europe and beyond. Alexander himself remains one of the greatest figures in history, his name a symbol of grandeur and ambition, his conquest a model of unprecedented resolve and military genius. Yet his legacy is not solely war and conquest. It is also cultural and philosophical influence that turned his empire into a bridge between East and West, forming foundations for the later development of human civilization. Today, more than 2 millennia later, the name of Alexander the Great still evokes admiration and respect. He became the archetype of the great commander who not only defeated enemies, but left behind a world in which many peoples met and were joined. His ideas, dreams, and achievements live on in humanity's memory, remaining a vital part of the world's historical and cultural heritage. Though Alexander's empire fell apart, its influence extended beyond politics to science, art, and philosophy. The mark he left became an integral part of humanity's development, and even the fall of his great dominion could not erase the vast impact he had on the future. Alexander the Great will forever remain a symbol of ambition, strength, and cultural transformation. The man who opened new horizons for human history.